All right, we're going to start again. We are delighted to be joined today by the Deputy Secretary-General Amina Mohammed and UNDP's Administrator Achim Steiner for the launch of the Rise for All, a new initiative that brings together women leaders to mobilize support for the UN Recovery Trust Fund and for the newly released UN framework to support countries in their socio-economic response to COVID-19. After their remarks, we'll screen a short video, and then we will have time for your questions. Deputy Secretary-General, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you to all of you for being with us today, and I'm really delighted to be joined by Achim Steiner, the Administrator of UNDP. As we all know, we are living in surreal times. The world as we know it has been hit by an unprecedented health, humanitarian, and economic crisis. COVID, a pandemic touching all corners of the world, and we will need our solidarity to rise to the occasion of the global response that is needed at a magnitude that we've never seen before. Every country and community will be affected, and under the leadership of the Secretary-General, our job in the United Nations is to be ready to serve and to support countries, governments, communities, businesses in fighting the pandemic, suppressing the virus, and ensuring that we support all leaders in the socio-economic recovery. Today, I'm pleased to launch two efforts in support of the world's response to COVID-19 and recovery. First, the framework for immediate socio-economic response and recovery to COVID, which puts into practice the SG's report, A Shared Responsibility, Global Solidarity, that he released in March. The second is Women Rising for All, putting women leaders at the forefront, calling the world to action for the responses that we will need on the health, the economic, and the humanitarian front. For the framework, this complements all UN efforts, particularly in health, that has been ably led by WHO and Dr. Tedros. It's also been led in the humanitarian sector on the humanitarian response plan. The framework centers around 5 interconnected clusters. In a nutshell, ensuring that our health services are protected, reinforced, and capacities built to build back better. The second, ensuring that people have access to social protection and basic services. The third will be to protect jobs, SMEs, and supporting economic recovery. The fourth, supporting elements of a fiscal and financial stimulus, macroeconomic frameworks, including the call for a debt standstill to allow fiscal space to address the crisis. And the last but not least is that community engagement that we will need to build the resilience of the most vulnerable. The framework restates and commits to human rights, the environmental sustainability, climate action, gender equality, thus reflecting the 2030 Agenda, the Paris Agreement. COVID-19 may have put a pause button on the world, but it certainly hasn't stopped climate change, nor has it stopped the vulnerabilities, the inequalities around the world, and we must take profit from this crisis to look at the opportunities we can address. The framework guides actions through the next 12 to 18 months under the leadership of the resident coordinators and our country teams, and we will be relying on the technical lead of UNDP to ensure that we can operationalize this framework in the shortest possible time. It is the first time that we are looking at development with an emergency lens. We've looked at the humanitarian and the health, but now for development, it is equally urgent that we attend to the crisis. Aligned with the call, the SG has launched the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund. This will catalyze action at the country level to mobilize in the first instance $1 billion by the end of the year and $2 billion overall. This call has already gone out to 47 of our most vulnerable countries, and we've received all responses, hoping that we will get out to deliver on those calls by the beginning of May. We will be rising to this occasion with women at the forefront. We've heard over and over again how they carry the brunt, the burden of COVID-19 in the health, the humanitarian, and certainly the socioeconomic piece. And for that, we have an amazing number of women who are coming forward today to support us in that call to action. And I'd like to welcome the leadership of President Saleh Work of Ethiopia, Prime Minister Solberg of Norway, our Sustainable Development Advocate and founder of the Education Above All initiative, Her Highness Sheikha Moza bint Nasser, and the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, Melinda Gates, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and many more incredible leaders as we rise today to take our actions forward in ensuring that we come out, we conquer COVID-19 and we come out the other side better. Now more than ever, we need to come together to overcome this global threat that affects us all. The UN fully committed to supporting people and governments as we go in this struggle together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the Administrator of UNDP, Achim Steiner. Achim, you have the floor.
Thank you, Stefan. DSG, distinguished members of the press corps, it's a pleasure to join Amina Mohammed today in presenting to you what is at the core of the UN's response, alongside both the health response that the DSG has just spoken to and also the humanitarian response plan that has already been put in place. As we all know, and as the Deputy Secretary-General just reminded us, we are dealing with a multifaceted crisis right now. One that in the first instance is a health crisis, a health systems crisis, but it is also, and increasingly so, a social and an economic crisis. And indeed, in parts of the world, that social and economic disruption is almost arriving simultaneously or even faster than the health crisis itself. We are facing not only a few months, but indeed perhaps a year or two of very significant disruption. The International Monetary Fund has already provided at its spring meetings a very bleak outlook in terms of a global recession. And clearly the focus of the United Nations development system, with its 131 resident coordinator offices that cover 162 countries, with its over 40 agencies, funds and programs, is now at the forefront of working alongside countries and helping them to address this socio-economic dimension of the COVID-19 crisis. In the first instance, the socio-economic framework and the response that we have laid out seeks to both align itself with the immediate priority of addressing the suppression of the virus. But at the same time, countries are now faced with extraordinary dilemmas and choices. First of all, to identify the most vulnerable, be it women, be it people living in slums, be it those who have lost their jobs, be it the literally hundreds of millions of people in the informal sector, because in many developing countries, indeed, the informal sector is the majority of jobs that underpin the livelihoods of people and families. In parts of the world, that informal sector accounts for 60, sometimes 70 and 80% of the workforce. These are people who literally overnight will be left without jobs. Trying to balance also the stabilization measures between urban and rural areas, and addressing also the dilemmas of perhaps stabilizing major parts of business and the modern economy with, if you want, that economy that is in the informal and the rural sectors, and often will involve far more people in terms of jobs lost. These are choices that governments must make literally in days and weeks, and this is first of all the entry point also for our UN development system response and support right now. Doing the assessments, identifying the most vulnerable, developing immediate response measures against a highly constrained fiscal environment. This is one of the great dilemmas right now, that for many developing countries, particularly least developed countries, but also literally most of the developing countries, it is now a problem of not having, first of all, the infrastructure, sometimes in the health system, but also the means in an economy to be able to stabilize the vast majority of the population in these economic shutdowns. Our approach, which is based on these 5 streams that the DSG briefly mentioned, namely protecting the health services and systems, social protection and basic services, protecting jobs and small and medium-sized enterprises, 4th, macroeconomic choices and international cooperation and multilateralism, and 5th, the social cohesion and community resilience. Because what we face in this socioeconomic context is not only something that we measure in monetary terms. It is the livelihoods, it is the vulnerability, it is a confidence in government, it is a trust in the ability of government to lead economies and societies through this process. Much of our work in the full range of the United Nations development system family is now focused on trying to bring both the expertise, the insight, and the support of our specialized agencies in support of government. Just in the last few days, you have seen already some of the staggering statistics that governments are confronted with. The World Bank expecting 40 to 60 million people could be pushed into extreme poverty this year. The International Labour Organization signaling the equivalent of 195 million jobs potentially being lost in the immediate aftermath or in the context of COVID-19. And last week, the World Food Programme also alerting us to the fact that 135 million people are facing crisis hunger levels, and another 130 million potentially could face starvation. These are extraordinary challenges, and therefore in our deployment as a United Nations development system, our single most important priority right now is to help governments structure their response, mobilize international support, look at domestic financial possibilities in order to underwrite these investments that are needed, and ultimately through this work also help countries to design into their recovery strategies also the DNA of a Build Back Better strategy. These are extraordinary sums that are being borrowed from future generations that are creating an extraordinary debt burden also on countries. It is vital that we combine this with an immediate socio-economic response that can help people in the here and now, but also allows countries to leverage some of this to come out with a future economy that is more resilient, addresses challenges of sustainability, inequality, and vulnerability in a more effective way. I end here by offering, through the press conference today, also further responses on more detailed measures. They cover literally the full breadth of the sectors in our economy, but are embedded in the overall umbrella of the socio-economic response as laid out in the strategy that the Secretary General has released. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Achim. Before we go to your questions, Achim, if I could ask you to mute your headset for 2 seconds. We will have a short video on the Rise for All initiative, and then we will take your questions.
I've been truly inspired, and I know others will be too. It is time for us to rise as women leaders, taking action to conquer the pandemic and come out stronger.
We are in the middle of a major global crisis. The coronavirus knows no borders.
The world is collectively experiencing human distress unlike ever before.
A virus anywhere is a virus everywhere.
You cannot turn a blind eye from the long-term consequences that will likely imprint our children and youth.
The only solution that comes to my mind is the inclusive recovery of the whole world.
We all face the same enemy, and we stand to gain by bringing the full force of humanity together.
Each country can start to prioritize during this moment when the world is being asked to pause, that we can come back fitter and better.
The UN's COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund is a chance to unite the world around our common goal, to support the world's most vulnerable people.
For the victims who are seen and unseen, who are known and unknown, for the heroes who we applaud and who we sing, and the unsung heroes. That's why we rise.
We can do it working together, but we need to respect each other, to see each other, to hear each other.
And becoming more empathetic and more kind towards one another is the only way we can fight this pandemic.
In our global village, solidarity is the only option.
I am therefore calling on governments in every country in the world to stand up
and to let the world's most vulnerable people know they are not alone.
United, in partnership with each other, with collaborations with one another, acting out of empathy, compassion, and unity.
These solutions can be found right here within our communities. They know better how badly their life has been impacted.
Let's not waste this moment in time to really react to combat COVID-19.
The United Nations has made a call for all countries to work together.
Join us. Let's turn this global challenge into new opportunities.
Robust international cooperation, not international competition.
Global institutions and governments must work together.
Who else can win this battle without solidarity?
This is a moment that unites us.
Stay strong.
Learn from this human crisis to recover better by building back better together. My call is simple. It's our turn.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will now go to your questions. If I can get the journalist slate up on the screen, that would be helpful. I think our first question is from Pam Falk at CBS News, who asks how the fundraising is going so far and how the resource mobilization efforts are going. DSG?
Thank you very much for that question. Well, as with all things, fundraising has become quite a challenge in as much as we expect to have received so much more. What I would say is that the first steps have been really positive, that we have had 4 or 5 countries step up to the fund on the socio-economic, but also to thank those that have put money forward for the humanitarian response and the health response. These 3 go together, and we so far are seeing over $1 billion on the in the response to all 3 of the emergencies.
Thank you. Achim, did you want to add something? Okay. Thank you. Abdelhamid, are you on the line? Let's see if we can get a live question.
Yes, I am.
Please, Abdelhamid.
Thank you so much.
Go ahead.
You're on. Thank you. And Madam Amina Mohammed, first, happy Ramadan to you and your family. I want to ask you, Madam, about the Middle East. The oil prices had plunged to all-time low. There are many different wars and conflicts, and also the corona pandemic. So how do you see the recovery in the Middle East? What the UN can do to help those areas struck by wars and conflicts, and in addition to all these problems we talked about? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdelhamid. Ramadan Kareem to you and your family as well. Well, this is what is, really for us, a global response does not mean that we just have one size fits all. The solution in the Arab world has also a context in which is very difficult. And so we are working together with governments to see first how we can ensure that we prevent the transmission. In the beginning, those supply chains, particularly to more vulnerable communities, are open, and that governments are coping with ensuring that they are testing, and when they are able to find positive cases, they're able to trace and isolate and then treat. But on the socioeconomic side, I think this is really important, where we're seeing stimulus packages being put together. And there is this call, as you would have seen from the G20, where we are asking for the fiscal gaps that there are to be supported. In a number of countries, in Kuwait, we are working with them on special packages that they have to ensure that the social protection programs are there, cash transfers, and that we are able, with small businesses, to keep them going for the day after COVID, when one would hope that they can recover positively.
Thank you. Christian, ARD, German television.
Hope you can hear me. Thank you for taking the question. I was wondering, in case a medication or a vaccine will be available, which is most likely going to happen through one of the huge pharmaceutical companies, is there any idea or consideration how this can be contributed worldwide, also to countries who are not rich? Because I heard from leading scientists that they are waiting for a protocol to be installed in order to do just that.
Thank you very much. Important question. You'd have known that we launched the vaccine initiative on Friday last week, and that initiative was to focus on, first of all, developing the vaccine in half the time, 6 to 12 months, but also ensuring that we're able to produce it and to deliver it to everyone. The SG has called for this as a global public good, and that is what we're working towards. The initiative commits itself to that, and the governance structures to make sure that all the partners come to the table to make that happen. There will be an announcement on May the 4th by the European Commission, where they are looking at the funding mechanism for that. So I believe all hands are on deck, first and foremost to see how we can develop this vaccine as soon as possible, but the production and its access to everyone will be in everyone's minds, and the commitment, as you would have seen on Friday, is towards that, and we will see that reinforced on May the 4th with more leaders coming to the table on how we will finance this.
May I just have a short follow-up? Have you had any resonance from the pharmaceutical companies? Is there anybody out there who said, yes, we would commit?
Yes, there are a number of pharmaceutical companies who are committing to this initiative. In the call to action, you will see them listed there, and they come under various alliances, but the pharmaceutical companies are on board. The specifics of how this goes about are still to be worked out, but I can tell you that there's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of understanding that the solidarity and global response for this is unprecedented. It needs to be to solve the problem.
Thank you. Iftikhar Ali of Associated Press of Pakistan has a question. First of all, happy Ramadan. In view of the lockdown situation around the world, how will women leaders mentioned by you, DSG, help promote your cause?
Thank you very much, Ramadan Kareem, to all those in Pakistan as well. As we said, making people aware of the situation that women face on the front lines as health workers. You'll know that of recent you see gender-based violence on the increase, and many of these happening in our homes where we're in lockdown. So awareness is one of them. And then the solutions and the connectivity to the resources you can have to actually resolve these. What is important today is that we're seeing women leaders at all levels take up the gauntlet for this crisis, health, humanitarian, and socio-economic. Many of our women are in the informal sector, and they will be hit hardest by this. Many people talk about, in the developed world, a paycheck and stimulus packages that go to resolve the short-term response to that. But in the developing world, it's about a daily living. And most of that daily living is brought to the table by women. And so for us, it's really just bringing to the fore some of these huge challenges, making the case for why we need to have a debt standstill, to release resources for a government to use for social protection programs, cash transfers, programs that perhaps were going a little slower before COVID, but now we see the emergency of it and the exclusion of so many, particularly women.
Thank you. We'll go back to our live questions. I have not gotten any more questions on my phone. Any other questions, Florencia, from anyone? Edie Letter, AP.
Stimulus packages go to resolve the short term.
Thank you very much.
In the developing world, it's about a daily
sorry,
living.
I have something going on in the background.
If you could mute your computer, yeah. Thank you. Go ahead, Edie.
Okay. Thank you. My question is, $1 billion sounds like a lot of money, but for 3 separate appeals that have very large appeals, what percentage of that is represented? And my guess is that there's still a long way to go. Can you tell us how much that is, and in this economic climate, how you can try and get donors to contribute that significant amount remaining?
Thank you, Edie. It's great to hear you, and I hope that you're well and safe. What is important, I think, here is for the first time we are bringing to the forefront that this emergency goes beyond a health one. The health emergency is absolutely just that, and we are trying to confront it. But bringing the socioeconomic piece here is to make the call for other money. The money that you see in the fund right now is to support the work of the UN. And while it has got off to a slow start, I believe that it's positive. And once people see the work being rolled out in very difficult circumstances with the support of the UN, we will get much more. Today, we're getting, we're getting inquiries on how to put their pledges forward on this. I don't think that the over $6 billion that one is asking for the support is a large amount of money that cannot be made available. It is there in the financial system. We've seen it where countries have been able to turn around with stimulus packages of over $2 trillion. And this is actually saying to us that if we take care of the most vulnerable, COVID that is anywhere is certainly everywhere, we prevent that coming back again. So I do believe that we'll be able to use this initiative to leverage other funding. You'll know that the UN is repurposing over 2 billion of its funds to focus on this, but we're also finding other bilateral and multilateral institutions that are also moving this way, and so we see leveraging quite a large amount. The private sector has also indicated that it would like to partner with the UN at the country level on many of these initiatives, and I think that in the coming weeks and months you will see from the proposals that are put forward by country teams in support of government priorities the leverage for increasing the funding. We're all concerned that the funding is not coming in as quickly as it should, but we're hoping that we will put the investment case out there and the case for your enlightened self-interest, because I think this has to be seen as the solidarity that's needed to protect everyone everywhere. I don't know whether Achim would like to add to this.
Yeah, Achim Steiner, please go ahead and jump in.
Thank you. I think echoing what the Deputy Secretary-General has said, and quite clearly we can see that for much of the developing world right now, there is, first of all, domestically inadequate financial resources available, least developed countries, but also even middle-income countries that are considered developing or emerging economies are struggling with the extraordinary need to mobilize financing, first of all, domestically and then internationally. I think we need to look at this problem also from three different perspectives. We've seen a first response by the IMF in particular, with providing up to $1 trillion of financing that can be accessed by countries, although one has to emphasize the vast majority of these funds are essentially credit lines. So countries are borrowing in order to create fiscal space for the response in their countries. The second phenomenon is clearly the reprogramming in the development aid financing arena and in the humanitarian response plans also, because our concern is, first of all, that existing humanitarian crises are not neglected and defunded, because that will simply create explosive situations. We are trying to leverage additional resources, and in UNDP, in many of our agencies within the UN, we are talking to capitals in the countries we work in, but also donor capitals, to quickly reconfigure the financing that is available for a rapid COVID response. However, the real challenge, and I think, and our hope is that over the coming months, as countries first of all look inwards to deal with the crisis themselves, this was clearly the first response. We need to recognize what the Secretary-General has called for. At the global level, the same logic applies. Somewhere above 10% of annual GDP is probably the volume of financing that is needed in order to create the kind of mechanisms and means by which to be able to cope with this crisis. And an earlier question also referred to countries in crisis and in conflict. I just want to remind the world of situations such as Yemen, where already right now the resources are not adequate. Therefore, some of the humanitarian responses have to be cut back. But even in a country like Uganda, cutbacks in food rations were necessary because not enough funding is available. We are facing a very serious situation, and I think we must reach out to countries in the developed world to sensitize them very much, as the Secretary-General has called, out of a sense of enlightened self-interest. Because if you do not respond, these crises can easily go out of control, not just in terms of humanitarian suffering, but also from a geopolitical point of view. And that is why it is so critical that the notion of solidarity is not just one that we apply within our own countries and communities, but really as a global family. And this is very much the meaning also of a United Nations stepping in front of the world right now and asking it to be part of that capacity to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think this concludes our briefing. We hope to have the Secretary-General here with us later this week. In the meantime, thank you to the Deputy Secretary-General, thank you to Achim, thank you to all of you, and thank you to our technical staff for pulling this off. So take care, be safe, and see you soon.
Thank you very much. Be safe.